So welcome everyone to the first discussion session of the seminar. Even without a pandemic, change has been accelerating in our world rapidly, and we are very excited to bring you into a conversation that matters to each of us, the future of Aikido. So the objective of this session is for each one of us on the panel and you in the audience to open our minds a little bit and take away some ideas that we can use in our own settings to help our art stay alive and thrive. Again, I want to reiterate what Ted Sensei said a minute ago about audience participation. I have some questions that I will be bouncing off the panel, but Ted will be filtering yours as well, and I want to incorporate those into the discussion as organically as we can. So I do encourage you to put questions into the chat. The session will be recorded and made available later. So let's dive in. My first question for the panelists is around some global examples. So when you look at how you've seen Aikido or other physical disciplines practiced in various places around the world, what examples or anecdotes can you share that you think are hopeful and helpful for progressing Aikido here in Canada or in your own community? That's the question for all of you, and I will start with Bruce. Take it away.
Thanks, Ben, and it's good to see everyone, and hello, Canada. I've had the good fortune of actually training and teaching Aikido in various places around the world, and I have to admit, it's one of those really nice things about Aikido. You're universally welcome. It's a very welcoming art. I just love that. The nice thing about doing it around the world is you actually see the nuances, as in, for example, in Australia, it's a very the tall poppy syndrome is quite prevalent. So you never really, that overt respect of authority is never there. And, you go to the bar with sensei afterwards and you can just have a chat with them, just like a normal average human being, which is fantastic. On the other hand, you go over to some place like Sweden and nearly every dojo I train over there has a sauna. So you get these interesting differences because of the local culture. Now, an anecdote which I want to share with that culture is that some of the most friendly, casual dojos I've ever trained at are the ones in Japan. The real community spirit, mixture of ages and whatnot. And then I contrast that to say some of the most rigid dojos I've trained with, which are in the Western countries who are trying to replicate what they think are Asian cultures. And I can say that because I'm Asian. And some of that translation seems to be quite funny when you do see what other dojos are like around the world. So I do find that that casual mix and shall I say rigidness, it tends to be more prevalent in the dojos in the West than I do in the East. Keira, do you have a view on that?
Sure. That was great. Thanks, Bruce. I'll just start by saying I feel really privileged to be here. So Anita, thank you for asking. I agree. I'm Chinese, and so the sort of lax thing kind of works for me. I have less experience practicing Aikido internationally, but I do actually have the privilege of having practiced Aikido in many of the provinces across Canada, because I started my training in Alberta, and then I came to Toronto, which is where I'm from originally. And then as an actor, I would travel, and so I'd be doing a show in Regina, and I'd look up the dojo there, or I started to go to summer camps, and I'd train in Victoria, or I'd work in Winnipeg, and it was really fun. I was kind of amazed to discover through the CAF, because I started at the university. I didn't actually do a class with Kawahara Sensei until I came to Toronto, but there was a familiarity and a welcomeness and a real grounding. It was easy to be able to go to a CAF dojo and feel not just welcomed by the people, but also comfortable in the class. And the other thing that I think is distinguished in Canadian dojos that has kept me here and grown my practice is also the diversity, a recognition of the diversity of instructors. And so I'm a student of Yumi Nakamura's at Aikido Tendokai predominantly is where I did my dominant training. And so there were lots of different instructors. And so in addition to Yumi encouraging me to go train when I was out of town at another CAF dojo, there were also lots of different amazing instructors available at Tendokai. And so as a white belt, I learned to be just open. And then when that's met with this welcoming environment, it really established a love for Aikido and a confidence to be able to move into unknown environments. And then I kind of transferred that into the other physical disciplines that I practice. And so the other thing that I think most recently I was in Taiwan and found a Tai Chi instructor in Taiwan, and the accessibility of it, the fact it's just something you do, and the teacher that I was following taught in different places across Taiwan, in parks for free, at different community centers. And there was like a community that would bring her in to just teach. So all she had to focus on was teaching, and the classes were very accessible. And the sense that people just incorporated it into their daily lives and you can kind of do it on your own schedule was also very helpful. And something that I'm interested in looking forward to doing more, or finding other ways, or shifting the paradigm a bit in Canada. Scott?
Thank you, Keira. Great to be here with everybody. What a great way to spend Saturday. I agree, and I'll echo what Bruce and Keira both said. I think the issue of being welcoming and friendly and accessibility to all. And here's where I really love Aikido. And I think Aikido is way ahead of the other martial arts, because to me, it appeals to a much broader section of people than the other martial arts do. This issue of, as I get older, and I've done a lot of different martial arts, and I've been fortunate to travel, and I spend a lot of time in Los Angeles, and not all clubs are the same. And sometimes you walk into clubs, and especially as an older person now doing jujitsu, which is kind of a young person's sport, you don't feel necessarily welcome. And I always think about, when I go to a club, it's just, do I feel I belong here? And I think that is such an important concept of the martial arts, because is it a place where people come together, where we all belong, no matter what backgrounds we have, and that diversity that we bring. Years ago, I was a member of Aikido Shugyo in Toronto, Anita's club, and Fran Turner was the instructor then. And I'll never forget, this was, I think, 1998, 99. And I had become not a great participant, as far as I wasn't attending a lot lately, but I got a phone call from Fran just before Christmas, and I thought she was going to berate me for not showing up. And instead she was saying, Scott, that doesn't matter. What we really want is you to come to the Christmas party. And I tell you, you know what? The things that stick out in your head, I fell in love with Fran Turner that day, basically. And that is really important. We want to go where we belong. I go to a jiu-jitsu club, a couple clubs in Los Angeles. And one of the ones I go to is Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu. And it's owned by a guy named Marcus Vinicius. And years ago, I went to a couple classes with Marcus. A year later, I walked into that club and he said, "It's Scott Wright from Canada." And that makes all the difference in the world. And I think this is where, what we can do is welcoming everybody. Thank you. That's it.
Can I just something with Keira and Scott was saying? I was thinking of an analogy this morning. It's like, every guy's dream is to own a pub. But the issue with Aikido dojos is that we try to create a pub only for heavy drinkers. And you wonder why our clubs are shrinking. We've got to create this more open, accessible, that you allow people, like Scott says, I only come in once a month because that's the only time I can go, but you get welcomed. Whether our clubs are starting to drive towards, the only way you can succeed is if you train 7 days a week and stuff like that, that doesn't fit in with the modern lifestyle. And you wonder why our clubs are shrinking.
So that's really interesting. I mean, all three of you really built on each other, and in a fairly, it really built on each other. And I mean, one of the things I wonder about is, I mean, I basically agree with where you're coming from, but a lot of us have been around a long time, and we seem to recall a time when there was actually a little bit of mystery and exclusion and tradition that went with Aikido. It wasn't just open arms, anybody, come big tent. And so it was more like, meditate outside the teacher's door for 3 days in the rain or what have you, right? I mean, I don't know of anyone who actually had to do that, but we hear those kinds of stories, and that's part of the mystery and the allure of a traditional martial art as well. So I wonder, is there anything to that, or should we really just be moving forward in a more open way? And that's a question for any of you.
I don't know if they're mutually exclusive. Again, I'm kind of a subscriber to the sit outside in the rain for 3 days, kind of like, I like my students being interested in being there, but that doesn't mean I make it hard for them. If it's raining, I'll let them in my house if I'm home. There's only so much. What I find in terms of running a dojo and running a dojo outside of an urban center, the hard thing for me to do is actually to offer enough classes. So what was interesting was, like, Bruce, you're talking about, like, you don't need to go every day, but then there's people, this happens all the time for actors, right? There's people who go to the gym every day. There's people who do yoga every day. So how are they making those decisions? And what's stopping them from being able to do this? Yumi Sensei once said, when I started teaching, she said, 2 classes a week, you can kind of maintain the physical aspect of what Aikido is. 3 times a week at minimum, you'll progress. You'll be able to experience your progression. And as someone I could barely make time to offer 2 classes a week on my own schedule. And I had no other senior students to be able to continue that. But one of the things that's kind of great with pandemic is if online courses are actually, if people start to recognize that, or if you have a base knowledge. I did Ben's class. I'm like, thank God I can do Aikido again. I don't have to teach, right? So if there's more of that, then maybe we can start to offer, or we give other people opportunities to train more often if they want to. And if they don't, they don't. But at least the doors are open a bit more. And what I found, like when I was training in Toronto, the fact that I could go easily 3 times a week, there was a class 6 days a week, classes were offered. It really helped. Like it really helped.
Great. So yeah, I've heard a great common theme there to start us off. There are a couple of questions that are coming in, and eyeballing them, I can see that there are also questions that I wanted to ask as well. So that's great. So I'm going to jump to one that is actually a little bit about demographics. So earlier, I think, Scott, you said one of the things that appealed to you is that there's a broader cross-section of participants. Okay, so I'm leaving aside the diversity of teacher thing that you spoke on, Keira, for the moment. We'll come back to it, but the diversity of participants. And that's something that I've seen as well that I really like, is young and old, fit and not, male, female, every cut you can possibly do, and people can practice with each other. So that's an ideal. And I've seen it, I know we've all seen it in different places, but there's a very strong sense, I have anyway, and I think I got from the question that's asked on here, is that the demographics are changing and our clubs are getting older. And I guess the question for the panelists is, first of all, do you see that as well? And if so, I'm going to build on the question, is what should we be doing, or what can we do to adapt to that in a very positive way? So I guess I'll bounce back to Keira, please.
Okay. I'll try to be quick because I want to hear from Bruce and Scott. I would say I see that at seminars. So, and I have been seeing that at seminars of the CAF for the last number of years. However, I also have seen, and I've experienced, I didn't offer kids classes, but I had a lot of requests for kids classes. So it feels then, and then the other sort of demographic that started to grow at seminars was like kids, and then adult, and then older adults. But within people that were coming to my dojo, it really actually ranged. Usually less in their 20s, more people who are like 35 and up, but not necessarily people who are in retirement yet. And then I even got like teenagers sometimes. And I think, Scott, could you talk a bit about your report? Because you talked about family classes, and that's actually something I'm really interested in. Because when I started, I was told everyone practices together, white belts and black belts, because you can learn different things from different people. And in being in those classes, it made me start to look for what can I learn from this particular partner versus what can I learn from that partner. And that's me directing my own learning. And I think that family class is an idea that maybe can address that or make people practice that way just inherently.
Okay, I'll comment. Great question, Keira. The consensus seems to be in the world, and there's a lack of data on these things. The numbers are really tough to get. I've been trying to find out how many people are estimated to be practicing Aikido in the world and different countries. It's not out there, frankly. The consensus is that Aikido, the demographic is getting older and older, the median age. And from what I've been to get, the numbers I've been given by the CAF tend to support that. Historically, it seems that Aikido has not had the youth and the teen classes the way some other martial arts have really marketed them. In judo and jujitsu and karate styles, they tend to have they get the kids at a very young age, and then they get them in teens, and hopefully they'll stick around as adults. Usually what they do is they take a break and then they come back to it. Aikido, I've never seen, I know there's some great examples, Steve Ericsson's club and others in Canada. There isn't a lot of youth classes out there. There is an experimentation with the notion of family clubs in martial arts, which work well. Interesting, the judos and the karates and the jujitsus tend to have the opposite problem of Aikido. They lose people as they get older because, you get beat up, you get hurt, etc. You can't do this thing. It's very difficult. Whereas Aikido, and I remember when I first saw Aikido in the early 90s, I fell in love with it. I was a judo player at the time, but to me, it was a pure form of judo, the use of energy. But it was also, hey, I can do this all my life. That really appealed to me, and I think that is there. I think the issue of marketing and how you do that is based on individual cities and clubs and what works. I think you try different things. It does seem to me right now you have a lack of getting the younger person. At the same time, well, you know what? Aikido is a tougher martial art than some of the others. You don't just get to wrestle around the ground like the others. You got to actually pay attention and have to have a lot of patience. And that's tough to teach young people, actually, who and I'm a university teacher, and boy, the attention spans aren't that great these days. And so Aikido is a little tougher to learn than some of the others who just throw you in there. Bruce?
So the I think actually goes back to what the statement that Ben put in the first place is who are the types of people who would meditate in front of a sensei's house for 3 days? It isn't the young group. We live in a different environment. And the thing that's brought this panel together was that the three of us are adult educators or are involved in adult education. And how much of that has changed in the 20 years? It's 25 years since I last was actually professionally teaching. Back then, 25 years ago, it was a case of students would come to the teacher to learn knowledge. Nowadays, with the internet, with democratization of knowledge around the place, that isn't the case. Isn't the way that we didn't worry about whether students at university cared whether the quality of teaching, whereas now the quality of teaching marks determine our pay. It's such a contrasting difference in adult education and how that's evolved in 20 years. Yet Aikido hasn't. Aikido's still maintaining the way that we fought, assessed, viewed 20 years ago, has not moved along with the technological trends. And that's where I see the differences. And so we aren't actually going to attract that younger demographic because that's not what they're after.
So that's excellent segue, Bruce, because one of the other questions thematically that we wanted to speak about was adult education. So again, the three of you do have strong backgrounds in adult education in a professional manner outside of the Aikido world. Bruce, you talked about the need for change there. Maybe I'll bounce it over to Keira or Scott to speak to what are some things from your experience as an adult educator in another field that you can apply and bring forward in the Aikido space. Maybe Keira, would you like to go first?
You're deferring to me just because I'm a woman. Scott, do you want to jump in? I've had first dibs for a bit.
Sure, I can jump in. I think martial arts make a big mistake in thinking that that the person who's the most skilled, has the greatest skill, is the best teacher. Now, Bruce and I, we come from a profession, higher education. I mean, you go to a research degree, and then you get a job at a university, and they throw you into teaching. We're terrible teachers, most of us. We really are. We're not, and you know what? In defense of us, we're not trained to be teachers. We're trained to do research, and yet we have to teach. And I think one of the aspects in all martial arts that I've seen is, there's great teachers, and then there's bad teachers. But when the teaching is based on solely on the ranking, that's who ends up teaching. I see an awful lot of bad Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teachers, and who can't relate to me as an older person. Now, I have a great teacher right now. I love this guy. He's half my age. But you know what? He actually pays attention. And when he shows me something and he says, Scott, you got to do this, and shows me a technique, I look at him and I say, Josh, it's not that I don't see what you want me to do. It's just that I can't do that. My body will not be able to do that. And so I do think there's a need for teacher training in all martial arts. Judo has the Canadian Coaching Association program, which they put everyone through. And I do think, just like, boy, I mean, the most brilliant academic can be the worst teacher on campus.
I can totally pick up on that. Thanks, Scott. So I'm actually moving more into teaching within my field, in part sort of prompted by the pandemic, because they've shut down live performance, which is what I've mostly done. And there's really interesting things happening in my art world that I think are, they're kind of blowing up in the training facilities and teaching facilities. So the stuff that Bruce is talking about, of what is being asked of teachers and how are we teaching, these are things that are really present in my world right now. And I've started to recognize over the last number of years that I've learned more about being an artist, a theater artist, from my practice of Aikido as a martial artist than I learned in theater school, than I learned in my formal theater training. And so then I look to my Aikido instructors, and I have learned more from Yumi Nakamura, I think, just about how to be a good human than I have not than I have about Aikido, but they kind of been hand in hand. And so I think it actually goes to addressing what is Aikido. And when we're saying it's not about getting students, it's about retaining students and making those lifers, that I consider myself to be one, and Scott, you talked about it as well. And I think you're absolutely right. The best Aikido practitioners are not necessarily the best teachers, but it goes to something about training. So in physical training in theater, you say it's an experience of failure. And once you actually know how to do something, it's not training anymore. So there's like an Eastern relationship to failure that I think we don't quite understand. Training is something that we shouldn't be good at. And so so teaching, then what is teaching? And I think what I've learned in theater and what I've tried to apply or have learned through my dojo, I started to teach because I didn't have a community where I could continue to train. My students were limited to my practice. I was a Nidan at the time when I started, but my role as a teacher is to facilitate a lower ranked student's experience of Aikido. I think that the teacher, and then I continue my training in Aikido by teaching. And I learn as much from my students, but different things as they hopefully learn from me. And I think the teacher has to just provide the environment and invest themselves in their students, which is certainly what I've received from my teachers, just by embodying the values of what they practice. So, sorry, getting back to the idea of like, why do we practice? One of the things that one of my fellow Aikidoka, Michael Barker, was just texted me about is like the idea of giving up on, not giving up, but like, do we really practice Aikido or continue to practice Aikido because we think it's the best combative training for a martial art? It was never really that for me, but I know it's dominantly that for others. And the thing, Scott wrote a report for the CAF about why people train Aikido that spoke to me much more. And it was about giving me meaning, giving my life meaning, giving the path of my life meaning, and giving me community. And I kind of, Michael put me onto this, an article in the Aikido Journal where Chiba Sensei sort of talks about it a bit in that way. And so it was very reassuring to kind of go back to these masters and hear some of the same ideas. They'll manifest differently in 2021 than they did when those guys were running their dojos. But that, I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
So let me try to summarize a couple things that jumped out at me in that. So I've heard, one, being a great skilled practitioner does not mean being a great teacher. 2, we should have some sort of teacher training going on, right? 3, Aikido has, the community aspect, which we spoke about before, is very important for people being in, but also there's something about Aikido that gives life meaning. That's a very big concept. So these are the things that we've kind of talked about in the past, I don't know, 4 minutes. And so I'm going to bounce it over to Bruce because he's waving, and I'm sure he's got some fantastic way of tying these things together and moving on to something that is going to be maybe that we can use kind of practically to address these questions about teaching.
No, I'm like
just again, drawing on your experience as an educator, if you can. Sorry, Bruce, go ahead.
There, Ben, but I'm actually going to be a little bit more controversial on that because let me put a little bit of context first. So I sit on the board of governors for George Brown College. I sit on an advisory committee within University of Toronto. So I'm on a governance level. And so I'll put in reference to what I'm about to say now in that context. Our higher education institutions have realized it's actually nothing to do with the teachers anymore. Well, not nothing, but the focus is actually on the student. The teacher is of less relevance now than it was previously. And the reason why I say that is back in the old days, you remember when we used to covet the VHS tape that we had of O-Sensei, or that photograph or that book that someone had and you never could, and that was a piece of gold that you had. Now all of that's available on YouTube. So much information is available to the student, but the teacher, him or herself, is not actually the central focus. The central focus for higher education institutions, and us in a governance sense, is how do we make the student learning progress the most effective? And that could be with one teacher, multiple teachers, multimodal, different ways of input. It really has disrupted the way that we train students, adult students, to go up the social ladder. Once again, Aikido has not adapted to that. Aikido has maintained a hierarchical dojo, sensei structure that is not moved with the times.
But what about the rigor of actual practice, Bruce, right? Like I, in terms of this diversity of instructor then, right? Like, can we keep the structure if the teacher is facilitating a space? It's still incumbent on the student to show up, right?
Yes. No, I know. I'm not saying that the higher education is a model that Aikido should be replicating. But the way that we've adapted in higher education to understand that the student is now the central focus and no longer how we teach them is something I want to throw out there. Could this be something to keep Aikido alive in the future?
Yeah, it's a great shift in focus. I mean, each of us as a student is probably self-centeredly thinking about our own personal development. But then as a teacher, what is our focus? Is our focus on, as one of my senseis said to me was, as a teacher, what you want to be doing is creating students who are fun to train with or good to train with, right? That's also kind of selfish, right? That's about me. It's like, I want all these people out here that I can throw around and can throw around me and it's good, right? But it's also about them, right? So I think that kind of shift in perspective is a really interesting one. So I've noticed, I've been monitoring the chat a little bit, and I can see that the question about teaching is one that really resonated, and I'm glad you guys spoke to it. I mean, we could probably have a session on that alone, and we probably should. But we're going to move on to another question that came up right at the beginning, and that I wanted to touch on as well, which is about organizations. So each dojo is part of a bigger community. We're all part of a very large community, and organizations go with that. So what are some things that you have seen in terms of best practices that an organizational body, and in our case, geographically, we have the Canadian Aikido Federation, but some of us have affiliations or connections with other organizations that may be based more around a teaching style or what have you. But anyway, what are some of the best practices that an organizational body can provide to help support Aikido's progress? Now, is there anything that any of you want to jump in, or shall I nominate someone.
I'll jump in.
Go for it, Keira.
You didn't
All
ask
right.
me to, Ben. Yeah, so I would say, and I'm speaking specifically to CAF because in our prep talk, this idea came to me, and I think it would be useful. And I'm speaking as someone who's, again, running a very, very small dojo outside of an urban center, and reflecting on that versus how I got into Aikido and kind of hooked on Aikido, which is what organizations can do, organizations like the CAF can do, is facilitate community. And for a while, I know there's been different attempts to do this in terms of teaching, sharing teachers, or sending, like that dojos can get, financial support to bring an instructor from the examination committee to your dojo to teach. It's a lot of work. And I kind of would love if there was, it's all volunteer. So there's two things. One is taking on, okay, so this is where like my negligence comes in. I feel like I've been training too long and I was not demanded, I was kind of stupid and clueless to take on more responsibility. So, and it's this transfer. I think it's like when you take this hierarchy thing you're talking about, Bruce, this Japanese hierarchy that we assume and then we replicate incorrectly, is because we don't actually understand it. Part of that is learning evolution because it's relatively new to North America. I think I remember some of the Aikido, like my senpais going like, yeah, it's our responsibility to teach the white belts how to behave appropriately in class in order to be able to learn properly, taking that on. Or there are times when like, do I want to take on more responsibility in the CAF? And I kind of just didn't really want to, and no one made me. But then like from my family culture, I'm like, oh, I totally knew when it was my job to make sure that the cousins started doing the dishes after dinner. Like where can that learning happen? And so then that volunteer work, like the amazing stuff that Anita and her team have done to bring this seminar together, putting that energy into actively sending out instructors, creating community, because I think it would really help people to be encouraged to continue practice if they feel or experience the breadth of practice that exists that has history in Canada. Am I rambling a bit here? Sorry.
That's good. Keep going.
That's what I want organizations to do. I want you guys to organize a tour so that like our senior instructors get to go on a tour across country or even regionally to be able to like, and they organize that tour and then they just call the dojos and say, so-and-so is going to be in your area this week. Are you able to organize a class? I can totally do that. But for me to go, okay, do I want to do this and then have to apply and go through that process? Generally, as an instructor of a small dojo with another full-time job or a very precarious job that makes me have to scramble, I don't have the energy or time to do that. And then that undermines the community, the practice that we can build across the country, despite the geographic challenges and isolation.
Nice. Scott, are you able to build on anything that Keira just said in terms of organizational support?
I think when you have a federation, the relationship between a national federation and individual clubs is always problematic in some ways. I used to work for the YMCA. It's a federation. All YMCAs are autonomous, no matter whether it's Toronto, Vancouver, Oakville, wherever you are. And different clubs have different needs. I think some of the bigger clubs have probably very few needs from the CAF. They really don't. Now, someone who's trying to start a club in a new city probably could really use a lot of support. A club that's struggling financially probably could use some financial help. I think that one of the things the CAF should do is figure out what is the role of the Canadian Aikido Federation. I know I've talked with Kim Riddick, and one thing I have suggested to Kim, I think Aikido needs a really good 5 to 10 minute video on what is Aikido. That all clubs could utilize and that they would have on their Facebook page and could promote that in general. But I think that relationship varies with the club. And I think that's a really interesting relationship that has to be worked there. But I agree with Keira, facilitate support.
Thanks.
And by the way, I think facilitating this is a great initiative of the CAF.
It's so fun to talk to each other. We don't usually like, at first it was weird, but then it felt like totally appropriate to the pandemic and also like a really great chance to talk off the mat until we can get back on the mat again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of my closing comments is take something and go out and continue it, and that we will come back and continue to have these kinds of conversations. So that was one of my closing comments. Sneak peek. All right, moving ahead to Bruce. Bruce, have you got anything to add in terms of organizational involvement?
Yeah, so I just want to chime in with the organisation I was in with Australia. Basically, when you got to third dan, or certainly before you went for your third dan grading, there was a heart-to-heart with the Shihan going, well, it's now time, you're about to get your third dan, so it's now time for you to open up a dojo. It really was just try to grow the family. You know, you're an adult kid. You shouldn't be living in the family house. Time to kick you out and get yourself started. And there was
you saw that as a good thing?
Yeah, it was a good thing. And there I say there's a lot of great things to learn, you know, when you actually have to manage your own set of students, and you learn a lot more about your Aikido anyway. The good thing about it was that the association supported it in the sense of they provided startup mats. There was essentially a set of mats that went around every new dojo that started up. And, you know, by the time that you got your own mats, you know, one of the biggest capital costs, obviously, then that startup mats came back to the home club, and then, you know, passed down to the next one. Obviously, insurance was organised, your training, your various teachers training and such like that, so you can get your teachers accreditation and such. So all of that was actually centrally organised to help propagate the art. I'm not sure what CAF does.
Great, there's some great nuggets there. I think we'll shift gears slightly and talk about how you've seen things change over the past several decades. So, I mean, we've all been practicing for a number of decades, all of us on the panel here, and we've seen things change. What has changed in the environment that presents challenges to Aikido's advancement, and what do you see as opportunities due to all of the changes that we've seen? So that's a very open-ended question. Go ahead, Bruce.
Because I want to address Ivan's comment in the comments. As in,
okay.
I fully agree, Ivan. You know, the fact that students go and look up videos and go and explore themselves doesn't necessarily improve the learning outcomes. And unfortunately, it's a fact of reality. That's that accessibility that we did not have 20 years ago is what they are taking advantage of now. And until we accept that that's going to occur, and then actually be versatile teachers to be able to go, oh yeah, no, I've seen what this person, way he or she does Ikkyo, and this is the reason why we do it differently, and you know, there's a pros and cons of both. We have to accept the fact that additional information is going to come across. It will make us better teachers at the end of the day.
I'll jump on that, Bruce.
Yeah, go ahead, Keira.
I think you're right. Like it is sort of actually an answer to Ben's question, which is learning to teach in a plural environment, right? Like what Yumi always would say at Tendokai was like, you know, when you're in Rob's class, do what Rob's teaching, and when you're in Greg's class, do what Greg's doing, and when you're in Alex's class, do what he's doing. Like, and there's an exercise in humility there, and there's an exercise in observation. But it's also practical. You still have to show up, right? Like, and I think that's the thing I worry about, pandering too much to try to get students. When we say student-centered learning, for me, it's about them moving away from that expert thing of, I'm going to teach you how to be the best fighter, if you will. This is the most martial practice. With my students, I've been very upfront. I'm like, I didn't learn it from that perspective. What I'm trying to do in my dojo is have strong, confident, authentic students. And again, there was another article that Michael sent to me where Yamada Sensei was talking about everyone's Aikido should be different. And that goes to, like, you know, Bruce Lee said it, right? Like, so at a certain level, your responsibility is to be yourself, right? and so I think there's that when you can learn to teach in a diverse environment. So like someone comes to you and goes, I saw this thing on YouTube, that you can go, oh, okay, well, what you get there is, you know, he's a big guy, so it makes more sense for him to do it. I'm not, so I'm doing it this way. But it teaches the student how to navigate themselves through this, right? Like, Kanai Sensei gave me my Shodan. His physicality made more sense in my body than Kawahara Sensei's, but it's not that I didn't respect Kawahara Sensei as much as there was no hierarchy between them. They're all amazing teachers, and I'm just lucky to have had exposure to all of them. So bringing that kind of mentality in your dojos with your Aikidoka, that our diversity actually makes us better or stronger and more sustainable in the future, rather than trying to take that diversity and put it into a hierarchy itself. Let the work speak for itself, let the training speak to itself. You know, the best dojo is the one that's like most accessible to you to start with.
It's an interesting concept on the, you know, diversity makes you stronger. Diversity of instructors makes you better. Diversity of learning modalities is important and helpful. And again, you know, just being a little bit old-fashioned, I'm going to push back on that in one way. I'm not personally old-fashioned, but there's an old-fashioned view out there, which is that, no, there's one way of doing it. Your teacher has a way of doing it. That is the right way. Thou shalt practice that 10,000 times and you're going to get good at it, right? You know, this kata, you know, if you come from a karate background, for example, this kata was perfected 75 years ago. You're going to do it exactly like this, right? And, you know, some of us came from an approach with our Aikido that was often like that. Now I see that almost all the time when a teacher is teaching, that they will say something along the lines of, there's lots of different ways of doing this particular technique, and today the way that I want to work on is the following. And it's almost like you've got this disclaimer that starts every practice. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, is there any validity to the concept that there is a right way and there is a wrong way? So kind of the anti-diversity message. Is there anything to that, or should we just all move on and it's 2021, let's get with the program?
Isn't the right way? I just didn't get hit.
Yeah.
This is where you have to sit outside the door for 3 years.
That one too, right?
3 days, sorry. But
3 years.
Okay, I go to a seminar, someone tells me this is the right way to do it. If I'm in his class or her class, I will do it that way because they're my sensei, so I follow it that way. If I go to a dojo regularly, like some of okay, I never approached it sort of like I want to be the best fighter in the world, but I still remember the points where it's like, Keira, you can't walk like that because someone just can knock you over with a feather. What does that mean? I'm not grounded. It looks good, but I'm not grounded. So it's like Bruce says, did you get hit? That's your fault. And I love Aikido because it's really clear that way, right? Like it either works or it doesn't, but you can't get there any faster. And if it's the student's first class, my job as the teacher isn't to make that student learn that in that class. It's relationship. I've got to build a relationship with it. They'll come to it in their own time. They'll figure it out in their own time. Or, you know, as they continue to practice with me, then I can like, you know, I can use the martial thing and then, you know, hopefully it works. So there is absolutely a practical way from a very just physical thing. Did you unbalance the person? Did it work? But expecting everyone to get it working within the first 3 months of practice, like, no way, it's not gonna happen.
All right, so I do want to come to the question of change again, and how you've seen things evolve and what the threats and opportunities are within that. So, you know, so I don't know, Scott, have you got any comment on your observations of how things have evolved over the past few decades and what's helpful in there?
I think that society evolves and the world is continually changing. There's a lot more choices today for discretionary time and money. I think there's a lot more choices. Aikido has had some bad press. We are not out in the public media very much. I think since the heydays of Steven Seagal back in the 80s or early 90s, Aikido is not out in the press. Jiu-jitsu, the MMA stuff has all come out of the fore there. And you see them a lot now. So Aikido has a bit of an image issue, and I'm not the first person. Josh Gold, Aikido Journal, he's got articles on this, etc. Lots of people have written stuff on this. So there is a bit of an image problem in some ways, in that we're not there on the radar of most people. That's the challenge. Now, there's tremendous opportunity. I look at the pandemic, I look at how society is evolving. I believe there is going to be a tremendous hunger for what Aikido offers. the issue of meaning, of self-development, of community, of, and all the other things that are there as part of Aikido that I think is going to be, people are going to want now, as hopefully society goes beyond the pursuit of dollar, and we deal with the problem of unregulated capitalism, and we look at meaning in life and how actually to live. And there, I think people are going to be looking for meaningful pursuits. And to me, that is, Aikido is a meaningful pursuit. Everyone here is, we're talking to the converted kind of thing, the ministers of the church who believe. And the problem is we need to get other people to experience it and, come to that, their own opinion on that. And hopefully they'll realize how beneficial this is as meaning in life. It's an existential pursuit, in my opinion. I'll stop.
That's great. So thanks everyone for the online questions and comments. And I've been trying to weave them into the discussion. May have missed some, but hopefully you guys are reading along as well, because there's some nice interplay between the different commenters and with the panelists as well, and giving feedback. So I really do appreciate that. I hope that that's been a little bit satisfying for you to be able to feel some involvement and engagement there. If there's something that you really want to make sure gets discussed, then now is your last chance. Put lots of exclamation marks on it or something, like if it's super important, do you want us to discuss it? But as you're thinking about that, I will leave it with the panelists. Keira's got her hand up. She's got something to say, so go for it.
Surprise, surprise. I'm seeing a lot of comments about online class as a format that I just wanted to say in
Please.
Context of the future of Aikido. Is there something that we've learned in COVID or through COVID that can help with the future of Aikido? And Ben's class was the first online class that I was able to attend, and there's so much in my world that's gone online in ways that are really soul destroying that I kind of stayed away from Aikido, online Aikido classes for a while because of that. And so it was actually completely joyous to come back to a physical practice. And what I've really enjoyed in this seminar is even just to see how the different instructors are leading their classes. So again, diversity. And I'm looking to start my own online class to add to that diversity. But I really do think, like Michelle, I think absolutely it's not necessarily a teaching method, but the structure and just like an accountability to log on to that class at 6:30 in the morning and to stay present and do my best for an hour. That does mimic a lot of how I felt in my early days when I was making a commitment to Aikido, where it's like, can I just show up and do my best? And if I show up and do my best, then that's something. And I think that online classes is a great way to make more practice regular, like to make space for people to choose to be able to participate more.
Thank you, Keira. I think the online format has really broadened our ideas about what is possible and what is beneficial, and how we can transmit some or a lot of what's behind, what the benefits are of Aikido. So I agree with that statement. Okay, well, in the interest of time, what I would like to do is start wrapping things up with sort of a final piece of advice, recommendation, opinion, what have you, from each of you in terms of what we can do to move Aikido forward into the future. So on that note, I will start with Bruce, please.
Okay, so I'm going to relate it back to my day job. So my day job is looking at future and emerging risks for the Canadian economy. And the thing that we're looking at is the digital transformation. I think on a global scale, we're talking about 80 billion jobs will be changing because of the fourth industrial revolution. And we've seen with COVID just how well the economy, businesses have been able to adapt to online technology. Now, I've managed to do Aikido classes around the world in the last 12 months without having to fly out of Toronto, which is really unexpected. Are we ready to embrace that digital technology, or are we going to go back to our traditional ways? And once the pandemic's over, go back and do things the way that we used to and miss out on the opportunities that the transformations occurred. And adding on that, just a comment from Scott with this aspect of wellness and mental health well-being. I was talking to Anita only last week about this. This could be a golden opportunity to rebrand and remarket Aikido for a need that has exponentially grown in the last 12 months. Let's hit it while the iron is hot. Otherwise, someone else will take in and they'll all do meditation classes or all do yoga classes. We have a golden market opportunity at the moment where Aikido just fits in really, really well.
That's great. I love the positivity and searching for opportunities in the challenge. So building on that, I'll turn it over to Scott. Have you got what's your biggest piece of advice or thought?
I think Aikido has a tremendous opportunity to reposition itself and to appeal to a lot more people, frankly. I think that there's two things you can do. One, my guess is you could double your membership at most clubs in the country just with some good business practices. You know, up-to-date websites, you know, basic marketing practices, some good retention, regular tests, et cetera, and all this sort of thing. There's 1,250 people currently registered in CAF, according to the data I have. I think you could double that with just some good organizational practices. But I think there's actually, I go with Bruce, what Bruce said, there's an opportunity to reposition Aikido to really attract a lot of people. Now, I've got some things that, you know, that I think eventually should be looked at. I mean, I think there is hierarchy problems in Aikido compared to some of the martial arts. I think you got to look at the issue of colored belts and some other things, but I know that's a whole other can of worms, so I don't want to go there. I think there's an opportunity tremendously. I look at the people, there's 1.5 million people estimated to doing yoga in this country. There's 30,000 doing judo. I don't know how many doing jujitsu, the karates, et cetera, et cetera. Boy, Aikido is just a fraction of these things. And to me, it's a better art. It's a better art that appeals to people. I like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I'm still a fairly physical person, and I've been a grappler all my life, and I still like doing that. I know the day's gonna come when I can't grapple anymore. But you know, when I don't tell my friends to come to jiu-jitsu, most will have no interest in that. You know, they'll look at that and wrestle around, sweat all over people on the ground and things like bleed all over. They don't have any interest in that. They do for Aikido. Aikido has all the benefits of yoga, the Tai Chis, mindfulness practices, etc., and far, far more. You bring that into't self-development, the progression through levels, etc., and I think, boy, there's something great there for people. I'll stop. Keira?
I'm going to speak to the art. I don't like business. I want help to run the business. I want to encourage the art. I think there's huge desire for everyone, if they're not a professional artist, to have art in your life. In that work, it's sort of what I've seen being at the heart of this work-life balance crisis that I think North Americans are in right now. Everyone wants to have a better work-life balance. People are with COVID are like, hey, I don't have to commute. Like those things are people are experiencing them in a certain way. And so it's where, again, Aikido and theater, sorry. Chiba Sensei, there was another article I read, talked about the dojo as having an impractical existence, and that's actually necessary. It's a sacred space. That's what it's been for me. That's what my theaters are for me. It's space in the world for something that is completely impractical. And I think in the West, that's kind of, because it's impractical, we have all of these problems that we're talking about. But if we go, well, it's impractical because it's supposed to be impractical. We need to have space for impractical things in order to find our way to that spiritual connection. That is what the art in martial artists does. And so then we can capitalize on people wanting to be martial artists and recognize the space for art in that and claim it, show up, do it. Once they do it, then they'll get it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. So in the interest of time, we will wrap up here for now.
We don't have till 2:30, sorry.
Well, we do and we don't.
Oh, okay.
So the schedule says 1:15, and I'd like to honor that because I know that the time has been quite tight in between things. So, you know, the format kind of flip-flopped around a little bit. So I think just, you know, it's an engaging conversation. Before people are exhausted with it, I'd like to take a break and give people a few minutes to move on to the next thing. So sorry, I will sort of wrap up with it, just a few closing comments then. So you know, this is something we all very much care about. And, you know, like you say, Scott, we could easily just keep talking, and we should keep talking, and we will keep talking. Whether it's, you know, whether it's online in fora like this, or more probably, you know, after practice with a drink or without a drink, whatever, you know, whatever your thing is. But let's keep it going. Let's everyone take something away and think about this. So some of the things that resonated for me was, I mean, it started off with the future of Aikido really is about community. And for the most part, it looks like that's about really an open tent diversity kind of approach, but then also balancing this kind of concept that Keira said right at the end, which was, well, Aikido is also this impractical thing. And that's got some appeal to it. Art, it's art, right? So, you know, there's always a struggle with art and business. And, you know, and we have that too, right? So you want to keep the core elements of what makes it art, what makes it beautiful, what makes it meaningful, but also in a way that allows spread to the most people in the best possible way, right? So anyway, that was one of the things I took away, was community and this kind of balance of what makes Aikido, and also exposure to a wide number of people in the best way. So things like diversity of instructors is important. Diversity of modalities is important. Let's jump on digital transformation. Let's use good business practices. You know, seminars, organization like the CAF can support by having more seminars, sending out instructors. They can be senior instructors, they can be junior instructors, but let's get them happening, right? The startup kit, you know, the dojo startup kit from the Australian Federation. Awesome idea, you know. These are things that kind of percolated to the top of my hastily scribed notes here. And also this whole, just take a moment and think about the mentality shift about not focusing on the instructor all the time, but focus on the student. What does that mean for you? Try it out, give it some thinking. Okay, so those were a number of things that resonated for me, and I hope that this has also stimulated your thinking. We've got something like 98 participants in this, which is just fantastic. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. So I'm hoping that each of you 98 got one or two things that you can at least think about, but at best put into practice, and let's make Aikido better. So with that, I'm going to wrap up with a thank you to the organizers, Anita, and a large crew that has helped pull this together. I'd like to thank the panelists, Bruce, Keira, and Scott, Ted for the support of the panel, but most importantly to every one of you for your commitment to the art and seeing it prosper. So thank you very much.